Welcome to episode 1, season 1 of In Conversation with podcast with me, Mike Phillips. For our very first podcast, I'd love to introduce Fleur de Lethal. Hope you enjoy. If that's all right. Oh, there we are. So at least I can upload it then into Anchor, and I can send it to you as well. Make sure you're happy with everything.
Cool.
So obviously I've been reading that you do the roller derby, like you just said now. How long have you been doing that?
How long? Okay, so my first time ever attempting was 2013. I was in Nashville at the time, and I was working in a call center, and a woman who sat next to me literally bugged me for about 6 months about going to rec league. And rec league is where a lot of people learn how to play this sport. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was practicing like twice a month, I think, which is not nearly enough, by the way. And then eventually I ended up doing the minimum skills requirement, which is what basically them testing you to make sure that you're safe enough to scrimmage. Because what'll happen sometimes is if a person is not ready, like if their skills aren't up to par enough, and you try to throw them into a scrimmage, they can actually end up hurting other people because they fall a lot, or sometimes when people are on skates, they start to fall, they pull other people down, stuff like that. And so, yeah, I did all of that in 2013. And then I never left the derby community. I loved it.
Oh, awesome. So what sort of rules are there in the roller derby? I don't know too much about it. Being from UK, we don't sort of get it over here.
Really? Well, just FYI, London Roller Girls, or actually they're London Roller Derby now. For a long time, they were one of the top teams in the world. Since we've been on a hiatus, I don't know where they would be ranked now, but they have a history of being really, really good. So there are some good skaters in the UK. As for the rules, most basic rules are this. You have 5 people from each team. You've got 1 jammer, 4 blockers on the track at one time. Usually the 4 blockers line up in front of each other like this. There's a line, the jammers line up like behind the blockers, if you can imagine these fingers being on a track, right? Whistle blows, jammers try to get out, and as they come back around, they get a point for every person they pass from the opposing team. So that's the most basic of the rules. Now, if you want to get into more complicated rules, there's things like lead jammer. There's things like a star pass where somebody else can become the jammer. There are different penalties, things like that. But that's basically it. The person with the star in their helmet scores the points. They get a point for every other person that they pass.
Also, it sounds almost like rugby and NFL, like a mix of the two, similar.
Yeah, some people here do say, "Oh, it's like football on skates," or "Oh, it's like hockey but with no puck." And it's similar in the sense that there's a lot of contact. Yeah, so it's different because you're playing offense and defense at the same time. So in that sense, it's almost more like maybe soccer or basketball in the sense that you could end up having to be on offense or defense at any given point. So I'm a blocker. If my jammer's coming around, I want to play offense and try to knock people down from the other team so that they can't block my jammer. My jammer gets those points. If the other jammer is coming around, then I want to defend my point. I want to try to block that jammer from getting through. Sometimes both blockers are coming through at the same time. And that's when you see a lot of chaos ensue.
Excellent. So it sounds. I'll have to look up the London version and watch a few games.
Yes. There are some good games, especially from the time period when they went to the international playoffs and international championships. I couldn't tell you specifically what year to look at, but if you look up the WFTDA international playoffs or WFTDA, or better yet, easiest thing would be to go on YouTube and type in WFTDA London. And you'll probably see some good videos from London. And there might even be some UK teams competing for the World Cup some years. So that I'm not as sure about.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, awesome. So besides obviously the roller derby that you do, you've already spoke about you've got your own podcast and you're a personal trainer as well.
Yes.
Cool.
So I've technically been doing the personal training thing for several years, but for a while it was only in the capacity of roller derby. Basically, after I started skating and I started kind of figuring out how to get better at it, and I had some trainers help me figure out what I needed to do off skates to get better, I became very passionate about sharing that with other skaters, because I would hate to see people come into the sport and get frustrated and then quit, because you learn a lot at practice on skates, but a lot of times there are things that we need to figure out as far as strength, stability, power, control, agility, that you kind of have to work out in the gym, you know? And so I first started helping my skater friends. And then last year during the pandemic was when I actually started doing training, because I was working with someone, his trainers quit, and he had just kind of figured out how to do virtual training to keep money coming in. And he was like, hey, I have these virtual clients. Do you want to train them? And I was like, sure. And as things started to open back up, I just kept getting more and more clients outside of Derby. And the podcast, that's like just a whole different side project. So Bitches Love Sports actually started over the summer, and it's hard to describe how it started. It was really just, me and a few friends of mine. And one day I was like, hey, how would y'all feel about doing a podcast where we talk about our favorite sports and occasionally objectify men? And they were like, that sounds awesome. So we just kind of fell into it, and now we're releasing a new episode every week. The social media content actually tends to do better than the podcast, which is kind of weird, but I guess it makes sense. I don't know. It's easier to just look at a clip and like it than it is to go listen to an hour-long episode. So
I listen to a lot of podcasts because I drive a lot. So I just tend to just put a podcast on, and then that's why it brought me round then to try and do my own. So obviously we chatted beforehand, and I just wanted to be really relaxed, and I just think a lot of people, I don't think they know how to communicate anymore. I find I can't remember the last time I actually just sat down and had a conversation with someone.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I was actually telling a friend of mine about a situation that I had recently that should not have been surprising, but because of the communication style so many of us have gotten used to, it really was. And long story short, a friend of mine who I've known for a long time, but we don't talk a lot. And we ended up getting into somewhat of a debate. And it actually had to do with, I don't know how much y'all know about the NFL in the UK, but there was a head coach who got in a bit of trouble for emailing some very controversial things. He made some statements that were misogynistic, homophobic, etc. His name is John Gruden. He was a head coach of the Los Angeles Raiders. And a friend of mine and I got into kind of a debate about whether or not this coach should have lost his job, whether or not the NFL should have looked at his emails and things of that nature. And early in the conversation, I was literally like, I can't be friends with this person anymore. I can't believe they think this way. I don't know how we were ever friends. No, we're just not going to be friends anymore. But we were texting, right? So then after we were texting back and forth for maybe like 25 minutes, it was ridiculous. He just calls me, right? And eventually we get on the same page, but it was like an hour and a half long phone conversation. And I just remember thinking to myself after that, like, wow, if I had just blocked him and never talked to him, like I really would have lost a friend over arguing over some guy that we don't even know, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, when you think about it, it makes sense. It's like, yeah, of course you're not going to be able to change someone's mind or even really understand their perspective accurately, or even be able to explain yourself accurately in a few 50-character messages over a few minutes, especially when you're like, yeah, I'm going to send this message, put the phone down, I'll come back to it. Yeah, it kind of makes sense that you might have to actually talk to a person, and for more than a few minutes. Yeah, it might take an hour and a half, 2 hours to really understand, especially because of the different communication styles that we have when we do decide to speak verbally. Because a lot of it was like, I studied human and organizational development in college, and they talked about something called the Ladder of Inference. And that is a concept where basically what we communicate is tempered by our experiences. So the words we use, how we use them, the words that we choose to use to express how we feel are all tempered by the experiences that we've had and what we associate with communicating a certain way, using certain words and expressing certain emotions, right? And what I realized was basically that he was saying things that I didn't understand because there was meaning behind them that I didn't know about, because it was meaning that he acquired through his life experience. And without me having an understanding of that, I wasn't totally getting what he was saying or why he was saying what he was saying. And so the reason why I thought he was saying what he was saying was completely different than the reason he was actually saying it. But we had to like really sit down and talk about it in order to even figure that out. And we understood each other so much better after that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, completely agree. It's hard to grasp, like you say, the emotions of and how someone is saying something through a text or a message. I've had exactly the same where, well, from my own point of view, I've sent a message meaning something completely different, and the way I've said it or it's meant to say it compared to how it sounds on a message.
Yeah.
And then actually speaking to them, and there was like, that's the way you meant. Oh, when you sent the message, I thought you meant this. And I've done exactly the same thing. So I've sort of learned myself now to not take a message as it is, and sort of take it with a pinch of salt. And I completely understand completely because I get exactly the same thing. It's like you say, the amount of places we've got to communicate as well, especially with all social medias and things like this. I think things like this are, they're sort of dying out, if you like.
Yeah, unfortunately. I even know some people who are like, I don't like having phone calls. Like they will not answer the phone if you call them. And I don't know. I guess I can understand, like, if you're, sometimes we're busy, or sometimes we just don't see the value in that phone call. But it does kind of worry me a little bit that people are kind of going down that route where they're like, I don't want to talk on the phone. I don't want to have people come over, I'll just send you a message or we'll just interact on social media. And I'm like, there's so much about the human experience that we're missing whenever we limit our interactions like that. I think when social media was first becoming popular, it felt more like an addition to the social experience that we were already having. But I think now it's becoming sort of a replacement for a lot of people. And you can kind of see how so many conversations become so much more polarized now. So it's like we're already seeing the effects of it. But I think there's also this element of social media that makes us so comfortable with that. There's a lot of people who don't even see it as a problem or don't even realize that, like, hey, maybe we should do something about this, especially if they don't have that experience of not having that as an option. That's one thing that I can say is, like, as a kid, I didn't have that as an option. So I do kind of have that experience to draw on of what it was like to, like, if I wanted to see my friend having to walk out of the house, walk down the street, knock on their door and ask their parents for permission for them to play outside, right? But there are literally people like my niece is 10 years old and she just followed me on TikTok. And I was like, whoa, I'm using language on TikTok that I don't know if I want my niece.
Yeah.
But it's like she's quicker to follow me on TikTok than she is to answer when I call her on the phone.
Yeah.
Like, I love talking to her, but it's just like that's she'd rather look at my TikTok videos than like have me call her and be like, hey, how's school going? It's so weird.
Yeah. But and you always find as well, the people that don't answer the phone, when you phone them, always got their phone in their hand.
Yes.
Constantly on the phone. Yeah, honestly.
They'll like ignore the call and they'll text you back and be like, what's up? And I'm like, answer the phone.
Press one button.
Right.
Yeah. It's I mean, with this with look at Facebook, or this metaverse is coming or supposed to be coming out in the next few years. It's just another avenue to get lost in.
It is. I don't know what to think about it, honestly. I'm not really sure what the metaverse is going to be. But the people that I've seen talk about it, they've been talking a lot about virtual reality. Apparently there are a lot more people with VR sets than I thought there were, because I'm like, I don't have one,
No.
I think I know one person who has one, and she has one because she was like a programmer and she was beginning to design games and stuff for VR sets like years and years ago. But she's the only person I can think of off the top of my head that I know who has one. But when they started talking about the metaverse, I started seeing all kinds of people on my newsfeed talking about their VR sets. And I'm like, is this what we're going to? Because I can't think of the names of them, but I've definitely seen movies about just these, I guess, alternate realities where people are living these completely different lives in these virtual, I guess, virtual societies. But then inevitably, it always ends up spilling over into real life in one way or another. And I'm just like, okay, hopefully somebody has some sort of filter to where we don't go that far down that rabbit hole. Because I'm like, goodness, people are still real. We really do exist in real life. There are still consequences. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. I don't know.
I know, especially when you mix it with Elon Musk's chip that he wants to bring, his AR chip.
Yes. And the number of people who are open to things like that, I'm just like, I don't know. I've seen videos of people hacking cars. That's too far from me. I do not. Because we were like, oh, you could just download information. And I'm like, well, if you can download information by choice, what happens when people decide to force download something into you? I just, no, I'm not here for it.
There's way too many movies that end that way.
Yeah. A lot of the technological advances we've seen, like the I guess what's the word? The worst case scenario. We've seen what that could possibly be with a lot of these things, and none of it's never good. It's never good. It's never like, oh, some company invented robots to take over, all the human labor responsibilities, and we ended up in a utopian society and everybody got along. That's never how it goes. It's always the opposite.
No. But the problem is, from being from the UK, everyone would be moaning about it anyway.
That's hilarious.
They're prone to that. They'll have a few robots doing their jobs, coming over here, taking our jobs.
Yeah, that's a big conversation over here too.
That's the problem with us from the UK. They love a moan about everything.
I mean, living in Texas, that sounds very similar. So I don't know. I guess when you think about it, like if you go back far enough, they kind of come from the same branch, in a way. So I guess maybe that's one of the character traits that remained. It's like there's a lot of differences between people in America and people from the UK. But, being settled by so many people from England, I guess that's just one of the things that has just like stuck around generation after generation. We'll find something to complain about no matter how things are going. There's going to be a problem. Somebody's going to have a problem.
That's it. Unfortunately, you can't please everyone.
No, not at all. Not even close.
How is Texas?
Oh, that's a loaded question. It depends on who you ask and what day. How is Texas? That can be phrased so many ways. It's weird, honestly, because it's like on a daily basis, things are cool. I have a lot of people here who I love and care about and like to spend time with. But every now and then it's usually politics that make things hard. I see people waving flags and flying banners that make me wonder if I will be safe living here, like after a while, honestly. Like it's concerning. Especially with, it feels like a long time. It feels like Joe Biden just got in office, but just at the same time, it feels like the next presidential election is around the corner. And I'm just like, I don't know what's gonna happen, man. People are talking like they want to get violent. And that's the part that scares me, especially whenever I see these people actually riding down the street, waving certain flags. It can be scary. But when I find the moments where I'm not worried about that, where I can just focus on my business and focus on roller derby and focus on the things that I like to do, things are good. So, ultimately, I would say Texas is great, especially if you can figure out your identity and find people who like the things that you like, which there are a lot of people in Texas. Texas is a very big state. So if you're willing to put yourself out there and find those people, it's awesome. It's a great place. I can say that there's enough freedom here to where as long as you're not hurting yourself or somebody else, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You can, if you have the work ethic to establish a business or an organization or a team or a hobby, there's almost no limits to what you can do and how you can decide to structure your day and occupy your time. So in that sense, I would say it's great.
Yeah, and just listening for like I said, I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and it tends to be a lot more open and a lot more free than a lot of the other states.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Texans definitely have a thing about freedom and personal choice, except when it comes to abortion, apparently. But that's a battle we'll just have to continue to fight. But when it comes to everything else, that's why Texas opened up before a lot of other states after the pandemic, when it came to like, okay, restaurants, bars, gyms are open. And it was because the politicians here were like, people should have the choice of whether or not, they're going to quarantine themselves and be safe during a global pandemic. They were like, it shouldn't be up to the government. We're not going to tell people what to do. We're going to let them have the choice. We're going to let businesses have their choice, and they'll just have to figure it out, and same thing with guns. Apparently they just made it to where you don't have to have certain licenses or background checks to carry guns. And they're like, well, it should be everybody's choice, and they'll just have to figure it out.
That's I mean, from the UK, we obviously we can't even get a license. It's very, very difficult to get one over here. But personally, I think there should be some background checks, especially when you see some of the results.
Yeah, I personally agree for exactly the reasons that you're saying. I'll never forget the first time I watched the UK version of Law and Order, and I was like, this is so weird, because like when I watch Law and Order here, it's like, almost every episode somebody's getting shot.
Yeah.
Same version of Law and Order, and I'm like, everything's so peaceful. Most of the scenes take place in the courtroom.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, that's so different.
Yeah. It's a complete different contrast. What can you say about it? There's always going to be that argument of the gun laws, I think.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, I didn't mean to make that face, but yeah.
It's fine.
Now, like, I read a lot about the history of America, and it's like one of the interesting things to me that I don't think people realize is that, like, the founding fathers, I don't think that they were expecting their word to be set in stone. It's like, if you read about like how they decided on what would ultimately be in the Constitution, they were kind of like, I guess, kind of like Texas government. They were like, we're going to do it this way, and then in the future, they'll just figure it out. They expect, seriously, like if you read a lot of the documents, especially like, there was the biography that came out about Alexander Hamilton, not that long ago, but they basically found a lot of writings of his, and he wrote a lot about the process of the country being formed and the Constitution. And you definitely got the idea that, like, one, not all of the founding fathers agreed on everything. So it's like, as much as we try to revere them and put them on this pedestal, like their word is law, it's like they weren't even all on the same page about it, And two, they did kind of expect people to change things based on how society developed. And so even though we don't know what they would say about, these weapons that can literally fire several rounds per second, one thing that we do know is at the time when they decided everybody should have the right to bear arms, it was like, it took you several minutes to even load a new bullet. They didn't even call them bullets. They called them balls because they were little metal balls. And it's like, you didn't even die from being shot. You died from getting infection after being shot. Because like, that's how little force they usually had, Yeah. And it's just so weird to think that people are just like sticking to that, considering how much guns and weapons have changed. But yeah, it's always going to be a debate. There's always going to be a debate. And one thing though that I will say about Texas though is that you have different types of living environments. So I live in South Austin, which is pretty metropolitan. It's going very fast. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of stores right next to each other. I live in an apartment building. So I live in a community with a lot of people very close to me, right?
Yeah.
I can drive 20 minutes away from where I live, and I can end up in an area where people are on farmland. And so they have acres and acres of land. Their neighbors are very spread out. They have cows, right? And so when it comes to getting help, it would take longer for them to get help. Like, there's a police department and a fire station literally a block away from me, right? But for somebody who lives that far out, they might feel like they need more weapons to protect themselves than I do, you know? And I don't even know what it's like to live on a farm. I don't know how often somebody comes and tries to steal your cows or sheep, or if, you know, being so far out and having your neighbor so far away, that makes you more susceptible to something like a home invasion, for example. But I do see that a lot of times that's what leads to the disagreement, is that I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody who lives in a crowded place and frequents crowded places. And then you have people fighting for gun rights who are like, I live out here by myself. I literally need to be able to protect myself because it's going to take the cops too long to show up if I need help. And so sometimes when we're listening to these arguments, we do have to apply a little bit of context and kind of realize, like, hey, there are reasons why they're saying what they're saying, as opposed to what I'm saying. Kind of going back to what we said before, as far as like understanding where a person is coming from before you like make value judgments about what their stance is, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And we, where I live, I don't know how much you know about South Wales, or I live three hours outside of Wales. I'm not sure how much you
I
know about.
visited Wales one time. I visited South Wales. I really liked it. It was for roller derby, actually. For a little while, I was a coach of a men's roller derby team, and playoffs were in Cardiff. And so
Right,
yeah,
okay.
we were there for like a week. It was cool. I liked it.
Yeah, so obviously you've seen all the mountains and the fields and the sheep and
Yes. Yes.
yeah. So it's very, like you say, it's very, very similar here as well, where you could be living in the city and then 15-20 minutes exactly the same. You've got farms and fields, and people living, a couple of miles away from the next house.
Yeah. Yeah. But there, it's just nobody gets a gun. I honestly
Yeah,
think
yeah.
part of it here is just that, like, they're like, well, if we say nobody can get a new gun, what do we do about all the people who have guns already? I think it's kind of like a catch-22 in a
Yeah.
sense, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. So, with your coaching, then, are you solely online, face to face, or do you do a mixture of different coaching? Or
Right now, I do both. So I have some people who I see online, because there are some people who still, they're not too excited about the idea of going to a gym and, you know, being in close proximity to other people. And then I have some people that I see in person. So I do both. I don't do any group classes right now, though. That's what I don't do.
yeah,
But I have several one-on-one clients.
excellent. So, have you found online picked up quicker than face to face?
Mm, I don't know. For me, since I was getting into both at the same time, it kind of
Yeah,
felt even. And especially getting into it during the pandemic, like all my first clients outside of
yeah,
Derby were online. But as far as like now, how like the process of getting new clients, it's pretty much even. Because the process is the same. It's just there are some people who are close enough to come to my gym,
yeah.
and there are some people who aren't close enough, and then there are some people who just don't want to come in. But I would say it's pretty even.
Yeah, I can relate with the coaching side because that's what I do as well. I've been doing
Okay.
that for 8-9 years now.
Oh, no.
So I've gone from face to face. I've sort of jumped in and out of the industry, but I'm just trying out to focus on online just to get the freedom. It just makes it a lot easier for me if I can focus solely online. Plus, it saves the rent from the
Yes.
gyms because that is
Yes.
expensive.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes, it is.
So Is that what do you pay rent to the gym?
Well, we did for a little while. So the guy that I work with, we got a gym, like a brick and mortar spot. And at the time I wasn't a trainer when we got the spot. He had other trainers and I was just kind of helping with the operations side. And so we got the brick and mortar November 2019. So literally just as things were starting to pick up and take off, that was when, the pandemic started getting bad here. And then Governor Abbott was like, yeah, all the gyms have to be closed. And we were like, oh no. And we weren't planning on doing virtual or online clients at all, but we had to because it was the weirdest thing. They were like, you can't operate, but you still have to pay rent. And we were like, what? And it's like that's one of those situations where that freedom kind of, bites everybody in the ass because it was just like, well, we're going to leave it up to landlords whether or not they charge you, and you'll just have to figure it out.
Wow.
So that's actually how we got into virtual training. That was not part of the business plan before. So yeah, that rent, it almost killed us because even when things started to open back up, like there were so many restrictions as far as like how many people you could have in a certain space. When we first got that space, we budgeted for classes where we could fit 15 people into a class. Then based on the space that they said people had to have and, the room for ventilation and all that, we couldn't have more than like 4 to 6 people, and so us increasing prices didn't really help, because we couldn't increase them enough to make up for the 9 people we couldn't fit in the room and still have people want to show up. So it was a tough couple of years. And then we finally got out of the lease and now we're operating out of at his house, he has a garage that's off to the side that's pretty big. And so we outfitted that like a gym. So, it's got the squat rack, rowing machine, dumbbells, all that stuff, kettlebells. And so that's where we work out of right now. Until fantastic. We decide to get another place.
Unfortunately, that story is just, I've heard that so many times, especially over here, where the amount of people I know that opened the gym as the pandemic was starting or started a business as the pandemics and the lockdowns started. And like you say, you still got to pay that money for the rent, for the bills. Nothing sort of stopped apart from being able to work.
Right.
Not
yeah,
good.
I really didn't understand the logic in it. But I mean, luckily we're still around. The business is still here. We just don't have it in us to rent a place for a while. We're like, we need to kind of make up for our losses before we try that again.
Yeah, definitely. So how did the podcast start? Did you say, how long have you been doing that for?
Our first episode was released in mid-July. I think it was like July 18th or 19th. And it literally started kind of like I said. So I realized that a couple of my friends really liked watching sports as much as I did. And so we would text a lot about different games that we were watching. This was during the NBA playoffs. So we were, going back and forth about our favorite basketball teams. And so then one day I literally just sent them that message like, hey, do y'all want to do a podcast together? And at first we were going to call it something else. But the name I had in mind at first, I realized that years ago there was a TV show with that name. And even though the TV show wasn't around anymore, I didn't want there to be any confusion, Yeah. And so Bitches Love Sports was actually the second name that we came up with. And it was just literally on a whim. Like some people think that it's supposed to be some sort of like women's empowerment statement. And we definitely support the idea of women's empowerment, but that's not actually why we picked the name. There is this meme that I would see a lot. And I don't know if you've ever seen these, and they say different things. I can probably look some up if you want to know some other ones. But the one that I think of immediately is like it's just like these jokes that'll be like get that bitch a PlayStation controller because bitches love playing games, or get that bitch a plunger because bitches love bringing up old shit, like stuff like that. And they're just they're kind of funny to me. Yeah. And so that's where the name came from. We were just like, bitches love sports. That was the thing. And so when we first started doing it, we had no schedule. we would literally be texting about a game. Like we'd be texting about a basketball game and then be like, ooh, let's record a podcast episode about this. When's the next time you're free? Tomorrow. Okay, cool. And we would just start recording. And so there were 3 hosts, but when we first started, one host was out of town, so she wasn't recording. Then the other host left the country. She's from Spain. And so that's why there's like a few episodes where it's just me by myself. And then the one who's from Spain came back. And then the other one who's from Seattle finally came back, but she's like really busy. And so that's why there's a lot of episodes where there's 2 of us, some episodes where there's 1 of us, and then there's still a few episodes where there's all 3 of us. And then whenever we can get a good interview, we do interviews. And so, yeah, we're just having a good time with it now. You know, we're just having fun.
I think that's what it's about. It's rather than having too much emphasis on it and forcing it too much, and I think it gets a bit tedious. Then I think when you're still enjoying it, seems your workouts. I find if clients are not enjoying it, then it becomes a bit tedious, and sort of neither of you enjoy it. Then, how did you find doing the podcasts on your own?
It's different, but I don't hate it. It's just that I really like having my friends there. One, because their personalities are different, so it adds a little bit of it's more of a dynamic conversation when they're there, but I do like to talk. So the episodes that I did on my own were just more like, okay, I have this thought and just let me express my feelings about this one particular thought, and then that's it. But having them there allows us to have a little bit more of a conversation. I think the episodes where there's more of us, they're funnier because, we make jokes, we make each other laugh. And I think other people find those things funny, especially judging from social media. People definitely find those things funny. And so, yeah, I do like doing it by myself, but I don't think it would be as much fun if I were only doing it by myself moving forward. I really like having my friends around.
Yeah, so like you say, you can bounce off each other a bit better then as well.
Yes.
Because I've tried myself just recording videos for my coaching personal training page and things, and the amount of times I've deleted a video because I just can't. It's just talking to myself. I just can't do it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that made a big difference for me is the fact that one of my favorite podcasts is done by a guy who does most of his episodes by himself. And for a long time, that was the only podcast that I listened to. So that became kind of the norm for me. So the episodes that I do by myself, I kind of follow that same formula. And his formula was to basically have a premise that he wanted to talk about, and he would just have several points, and then he would wrap it up, and that was the episode. And his podcast is a mindset podcast,
Right.
And so that's why a lot of the episodes that I do by myself, I might talk a little bit about what I see in a game or something like that. But a lot of times it'll come down to like, one of the most popular episodes that I did alone was about Simone Biles and, how she was approaching this mental health issue that she had during the Olympics. And so I just kind of started talking about the history of women and the history of Black women, especially, and just the history of Black women and mental health in this country, and why Simone Biles was doing so great as a role model in that situation. And so it was easy for me to just, turn on the mic, be like, hey, here's the situation, here's what's happening with Simone Biles, here's what I took from it, point 1, point 2, point 3, and then, wrap it up,
Yeah.
Yeah. But a lot of people like it.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to, like you say, like yourself, you're busy, and I think people don't tend to have a lot of time to listen, especially to my boring tone voice anyway, rambling on.
I wouldn't say that. But no, people don't have a lot of time. And I mean, I don't either. Like sometimes I'll listen to a podcast episode and, like, let's say it's an hour and a half long, I might listen to it 20 minutes at a time. And that's no big deal for me. But for some reason, there are a lot of people who, like, if they even see that a podcast is too long, they won't even start it. And I'm like, hey, it's a podcast, not a radio show. Listen to it. You can come back to it. You can finish it later. You can rewind. on most podcast platforms, you can actually play it back faster if you just want the person to hurry up and get to the point, so there's a lot of options. So for anybody listening, if you have friends who just haven't gotten into podcasts yet, just try to encourage them to use the tools at their disposal to listen to it a little bit at a time if they have to. Maybe they'll find a way to get into it. They'll find something they like.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it sounds like the old cliche, but I started with, I think 90% of podcast listeners, I think, with Joe Rogan. And I tend to listen to, because he has such a variety of guests on, I think it fits everyone. But again, go back to the personal training and the coaching side of it, I tend to listen to a lot of bodybuilding, fitness, athletic sort of podcasts as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of them are 1, 2, 3 hours long. And like you say, because I listen to them when I'm in driving, I can pause and carry on then when I come back and continue. Some episodes take me 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, especially Joe Rogan. His episodes are long. I actually only recently started listening to Joe Rogan. I didn't know a lot about him, honestly, but then he interviewed a couple of people that I was like really interested in: Miley Cyrus, Demi Lovato, Dave Chappelle, Neil deGrasse Tyson, people like that. I'm not an Elon Musk fan, but I was curious about what Elon Musk would have to say on a podcast for a couple of hours, so I did listen to him. And I actually do like his interviews. He's a very controversial figure here.
He's moving there as well.
Yeah, he lives in Austin. He lives in Austin now.
Oh, he's moved.
Yeah, he's here. I've never run into him or anything, but he's here. I know he's here. I hear about it all the time. People feel very strongly about the fact that he's here. But I think one of the things about his podcast is that he'll flesh out, and you listen to him, so he'll flesh out ideas over the course of a podcast that might be 3 hours long, but then you'll have people who will take one little soundbite and be like, he said this and he's terrible for saying this. And it goes back to that thing again, that's like you have to hear the whole thing in order to really understand his perspective. Now, I'm not saying that everything he says is right. Sometimes he deserves criticism, but I do think that he's more moderate and middle of the road than a lot of people give him credit for. He just asks a lot of questions. And I think there are some people who even take offense at the questions that he asks, which I kind of get it, because sometimes when you call certain things into question, it can seem kind of like you're calling into question somebody's worth or their value or their right to live. So, for example, if you call into question the legitimacy of a movement like Black Lives Matter, or if you question, whether trans people should have certain rights, a trans person will hear that, and to that person, you are questioning whether they have the right to live as other people live. You're questioning their very humanity. So even though to him it may seem like, I'm just asking questions, I'm just looking for answers, to that person it's like, no, you're calling into question whether or not I have the right to live, whether or not I'm actually a human being, whether or not I can exist, and that's not okay, And so I think that's where there's some legitimate issues with Joe Rogan. I think sometimes he doesn't realize the ideas that he's putting out there with the questions that he asks. But then I also do think that there are some times where what he says is boiled down way too much and then just misrepresented. And I'm just like, okay, y'all, come on. Like, y'all don't really believe that people are out here saying stuff like that, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the problem is, like, it's going back to that, like we were saying earlier about not being able to please everyone. He has such a broad amount of listeners. He's bound to offend and upset someone. And some things, I think some people look, especially over here, some people look to be offended.
I think so.
And it's like your podcast, Tim. Have you had any pushback with that?
Yes. And it's so surprising.
Yes.
It's like I knew people would be surprised by it because, you know, it's not a word that you see a lot in the title of anything, you know. But there are some people, you know, who literally have tried to tell us we should change the name, and we're like, for what? It's a podcast, you know, profanity is allowed. We're not offended by the word bitch, you know, especially if you use it in the proper context. There are some people who use it in a different context, in which situation I'm not going to be mad because you use the word. I'm going to be mad because your goal is to insult me or belittle me. And you can use any word you want to do that. If you try to insult me or belittle me, I don't care how clean your language is, it's rude, you know? But one of the hosts, she went into a group and shared one of our episodes and literally ended up in an argument with another woman about the name of the podcast. And I'm just like, hey, you know, if it's not your thing, you don't have to listen to it. We're not forcing this on anybody, but you know, this is our style. And so we're gonna go with that. We've had people who are just nervous about saying it. Like there have been a couple of people who will like mention us on Twitter, but they'll be like, bees love sports or something like that. And they, you know, I there are some people who don't like to curse at all, and I get that, but then there are certain people who are just like, oh, I just can't bring myself to say it. And we're like, it's the name of the show.
Yeah, I personally, I'm going to try and tone it down. This is probably the longest I've gone without actually swearing. So anyone that listens to this that actually knows me, they'll be quite surprised, I think.
That's funny. But yeah, it's interesting. I knew it would get attention, but it's actually been more controversial in some situations than I actually expected. And then like advertising is tough. I didn't think it would be so hard to find a platform to just be okay with it.
Yeah.
Like Facebook doesn't let us promote posts. Instagram doesn't either. We created a whole separate Instagram page just to promote posts. TikTok lets us do it. There was one ad that they shut down, and I don't know why it's so sporadic. Because most promoted posts, they're fine. But then there was this one, and they were like, yeah, we're shutting this down because it links to content that uses profanity. And literally the name of our TikTok account is Bitches Love Sports. And so we're just like, how did you flag this one? But okay, whatever. So yeah, it's been interesting, but we actually have a new plan for promotion coming up that we're excited to unveil before the end of the year. I'm not going to give away too many details, but I think it's going to be really good. And if it works, I'll definitely share in the anchor group and tell everybody like, hey, we did this thing. But yeah, we're excited about it because we've had to get creative. And at first we were kind of frustrated by it, like, oh, this is making things so much harder than we thought it would be. But now it's kind of like, well, we have room to try some things that nobody has really tried. So let's just have fun with it and see what happens, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It's well, when it's up and running and live, we'll definitely love to have you back on.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, this is you are my number one podcast so far.
Really?
Yeah, this is the first one.
That's exciting. How long have you been doing your podcast?
This is it.
Oh, this is the first. Oh, I thought you meant I was like the first guest you had on that had a podcast, because I know you have other type of guests. So this is going to be your first episode.
First episode, yeah. You're
awesome.
Number one.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So you're a veteran compared to me.
You could say that. We're at what? I think we're right at like 120 days now. One thing that I will say is, like, before we got started, one piece of advice everybody said, they were like, you know, record X amount of episodes in advance. Some people said 6 weeks worth of episodes. Some people were like, you know, you need at least 3 months. We didn't do that. we literally were just like, we're gonna record and release it, and record and release. We have no episodes stockpiled. Actually, I have one that I did over the summer where I interviewed a CrossFit athlete that I haven't released yet. And so I just have that one, and I'm just like, yeah, there's probably going to be some week during the holidays where I'll like put this out, because we're not going to get together to record, maybe, I don't know. But I would say that's one thing that I think discourages a lot of people. It's just like, you know, what happens if I can't record a certain week? And I think that's not as big of a reason to be discouraged as some people would like to make it seem. Because even when, like, last week we did an episode where we didn't have any notes. we were just like, and we had been drinking actually. We had some gin and tonic. We didn't have any notes. Like we were completely unprepared, but we were like, we're just gonna put something out this week, whatever. And numbers wise, the episode itself hasn't done that great. But what we did is we took the episode, and because there were so many funny moments in it, we broke it up and made social media content. And so we've actually been seeing numbers of other episodes go up because I think people are seeing these clips.
Yeah.
And so when they go to our website, they're not necessarily interested in the most recent episode, but they look at the other titles and they're like, oh, that looks interesting. Let me listen to that. Let me listen to that. Because like over the past week, ever since we started releasing those clips, just the numbers on random episodes have been starting to go up. So I'm just like, you never know. If you don't have anything, ready to go, then just try to put something out there. It can be short, it can be long. We have episodes that are 45 minutes. We have episodes that are almost 2 hours, So my biggest piece of advice is just like try to have fun with it. Like don't get too bogged down into the technicalities and the process and everything being perfect. It's like it's a hobby when you first start.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I haven't scripted anything here. I haven't made any notes because, like I was talking when we started, I want it to be just a flowing conversation because I think a lot of people don't have a conversation anymore. It's either through messaging, social media, and it takes the personality out as well, I feel.
Yes, I totally agree. And I mean, just not only the personality, but any level of nuance, because a lot of times when what we see on social media is the things that people feel the strongest about, the things that either make them the most happy or the most frustrated or the most angry, and they'll make a post about it, and then they just kind of move on. But we don't know anything about like what they might feel if the situation was altered. We don't know anything that led up to that, anything that happens after that. We never find out if they like actually change their mind, So
and that's another thing I wanted to sort of like, that's why I put the post in the anchor group, to just speak to people from as many different backgrounds as possible, because as many people that live in the UK and Wales, where I am now, it's still such a relatively small area. And I wanted to broaden and see, and you listen to other people's opinions and views and people from different backgrounds, and I feel that will help develop my own communication skills and everything else along with that as well.
Yeah, I would say so. That's how I got so comfortable talking with people, like especially I won't say here necessarily, but at least with my circle of friends here in the derby community, since it's woman dominated sport, there are a lot of people who identify as being feminists, for example, and there are different types of feminists though. There are some people who are literally like, hey, women have gotten the short end of the stick for a long time. We just want to rectify that. We want things to be a little bit more equal when it comes to pay or when it comes to access to certain resources. And then there are some feminists who are actually misandrous and they hate men, right? And so it's very easy to end up in circles of people who don't have a lot of experience with men outside of their romantic interactions, right? And so for me, one thing that I found, and this is just an example, I think it's good to talk to anybody who has a different background from you, but I found that it's just like really good to have conversations with men in my age group, just because like one thing that we, talk about all the time is that like, men are raised differently from women. We don't always talk about how that changes how they think about certain situations or how they approach things like self-expression or even their own friendships. And so just for me, like getting used to having like male friends, like actual friends, not like, okay, this guy tried to date me and I friend zoned him, just like people that I've like met from work, met from in the gym, like that there was no interest in whatsoever. And just like having conversations with them and just like realizing like, oh, wow, like y'all really do see XYZ differently than, a lot of my female friends do. That's so interesting, And I think the same thing can be said for people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. people who live, even different parts of this country, people who live in different parts of the world, people who are a different race. I think one of the most interesting things that I found, especially recently about race, is that like I'm starting to see more and more commonalities between people of different races if they have the same background. I think for a while it was like, even if you grew up in the same neighborhood, a Black person and a white person from the same neighborhood would have a very different experience. And what I'm starting to see now with people that I talk to is that a lot of times if people have the same socioeconomic background and they grew up in a similar area or went to the same school, they'll start to develop more similar values.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to see how that'll play out moving forward, because that's something that's already coming up here politically with the Latino community, right? Because I think for a long time there was this assumption that people of a certain race would have the same concerns and therefore vote the same way. And then you had this presidential race and people are like, how are all these Latino people voting for Donald Trump? What is wrong with him? Like he wants to build this wall between the United States and Mexico. It makes no sense. And then there were a lot of Latino people who are like, well, I'm a conservative because of, financial conservatism. And that was a bigger concern for them than immigration. Or even like here in Texas, like down near the border, there are people who have certain businesses that are related to border control, or people who are in certain industries that like Democrats wanted to implement legislation that would negatively impact those industries. And they were just like, well, how are we going to make money if you're trying, if your efforts to protect the environment are going to get rid of this industry? What are we going to do? So it's like, we respect you wanting to protect the environment, or, we respect you wanting to keep this country safe, but it's going to negatively impact me, and therefore I can't vote for you. I'm going to vote for this guy who wants to keep money in my pocket, right? And so it's like, you're starting to see that it's just like, no, you can't make these assumptions just because two people, have the same skin color, the same accent or whatever,
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely and that, I think there's a lot of assumptions being made by a lot of people, like you say.
Oh yeah,
definitely on that. So
oh, yeah.
where can people find more about you and your coaching and your podcast? And
Well, if you're interested in my coaching, I haven't posted a lot of workout videos lately, but on Instagram, I do sometimes post information about physical fitness. And it's not always workout. Sometimes it's just like, here's some information that you might need to know if you're trying to lose weight or be a better athletic performer, things like that. So that would be on Instagram at Fleur de Lethal. That's my full derby name. It's F as in Frank, L as in Larry, EURDELETHAL. And I'm sure you'll put that in the show notes. And then for the podcast, if you want to check out my podcast, that's bitcheslovesports.com. Exactly how it's spelled, spell it out, .com. And right now it's rerouted to our anchor page until our full website is developed, which will happen soon, hopefully. But you can listen to all the latest episodes there and find links to our Instagram and Twitter.
Amazing. Yeah, I've only, like I said, I've only seen a couple of your clips that you've posted, but I'll be definitely following that. And hopefully we'll get some listeners on to this one that will jump on and boost your listens as well.
That would be awesome. I'll definitely check out your show and see who else you have on after me. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, I've got a couple of guests lined up. A lot of them tend to be from the fitness industry, because that's pretty much my background. But yeah, I want to get as many people on from different backgrounds, different industries, fitness, business, as much as I can. Yeah, quite exciting.
That will be exciting. There are so many different philosophies in the world of fitness. Like, I'm sure you're going to have some really good conversations, especially if you feel strongly about anything. Like, my main thing that I feel strongly about lately is like the importance of lifting weights. So it's like really fun to have conversations with these people who are like, oh no, cardio is the way to go if you're trying to recomp your body. And I'm just like, no. And and so that can turn into like a really fun conversation depending on your definition of fun. Because I'm just like, cardio, like I do, don't get me wrong, I'm a skater, right? But I'm more about conditioning And I'm like, even if you do want to do a lot of cardio, it's just like your muscles have to be strong enough to protect your body from the stress you put it under. Have so many people have just like hurt themselves or just like ended up with like these bad compensation patterns because all they do is run, and then they go to lift and it's like, yeah, you can't squat for shit.
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna hurt yourself.
Yeah, definitely. What I find is that there's a lot of people over is the deadlift, barbell deadlift.
Oh yeah, the deadlift form that can lead to some interesting discussions. What's the
Yeah,
proper deadlift? How much weight should you be using? How big of a role does nutrition play? All that stuff. Yeah, especially if you get a group of trainers together. Oh man.
yeah. That's another podcast in itself, I think.
Yes.
Well, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on. Thanks for jumping on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a fun conversation. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. No problem. And yeah, we'll keep in touch. Let me know when you get everything launched, and we'll do it again.
Will do. All right. Should I just close this out?
Yeah, can do. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good evening.
And you. Bye-bye.
Bye.